Hello all, welcome to the show. I'm Gus Gagliardi and this is Fire Code Tech. On Fire Code Tech, we interview fire protection professionals from all different careers and backgrounds in order to provide insight and a resource for those in the field. My goal is to help you become a more informed fire protection professional. Fire Code Tech has interviews with engineers and researchers, fire marshals, and insurance professionals, and highlights topics like codes and standards, engineering systems, professional development, and trending topics in the industry. So if you're someone who wants to know more about fire protection or the fascinating stories of those who are in the field, you're in the right place. On today's episode of Fire Code Tech, we have Jake Zlomie. Jake is a fire marshal at the Montana State University. In this episode, we talk about what it means to be a fire marshal at a university and some of the interesting challenges that he deals with. Jake is a graduate of the Oklahoma State University degree program in fire protection and safety technology, as well as he holds a number of certifications in plans examination and other areas of fire marshal expertise. In episode 14 of Fire Code Tech, we talk about the challenges of dealing with existing construction and historic buildings. Also, we get into documentation and the difficult task of record keeping for a whole campus of buildings with a myriad of life safety and fire protection systems. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode and follow us on social media. If you want to drop me a line and talk about what you'd like to hear about on the show or guest ideas, you can email me at ggagliardi@firecodetech.com. Let's get into the show. Well, hello, Jake. Thanks for coming on the show. How you doing?
Good, Gus. How are you? Appreciate
Um,
appreciate you having me on.
yeah, it's awesome. Glad to have you on. Glad to have another FPST grad on. And so, yeah, I just wanted to get started with a little bit about your background and how you have become an authority having jurisdiction and just your professional history in fire protection.
Yeah. So you know, I kind of grew up in Illinois, kind of in the Chicago suburbs there, and I grew up. A lot of these stories kind of sound the same when you talk through with people in fire protection, but kind of grew up around the fire department. Um, my dad was on the fire department. My uncle was on the fire department. My grandpa was on the fire department, and it was kind of just it was kind of a natural thing to kind of be, go hang out at the fire station, or be down there and kind of be around it. And so really, when I was in high school, I kind of got kind of more involved. Our fire department had a cadet program, so I was able to kind of join at 16 and kind of get some training and learn about kind of what it involves to be kind of firing the EMS. Um, I was kind of always trying to figure out, throughout high school, what I wanted to do, where I wanted to study, and kind of got introduced to the fire protection program at Oklahoma State. And my dad was actually kind of the one who introduced me to that. He spent a year down in Stillwater, um, and kind of once I learned about it and kind of took the campus visit. I ended up just kind of falling in love with the campus and the program. And I really it was OSU was the only school that I applied to, and I got lucky enough to get in. Um, so it was pretty cool that it worked out from that aspect. Um, I had some great experiences, kind of getting into the OSU program, and kind of met some great people along the way, and just kind of really just dove in and loved the coursework. And the classes were actually, didn't feel like classes, and was fortunate with the kind of the strength of the program, and kind of some of the demand that the program has for graduates. Had some good internship experiences, and was able to pretty much each summer that I was there, pretty much had an internship. And was able to kind of get out and get into the field, and kind of get a firsthand look at what fire protection looked like. I really kind of settled into the fire protection realm of the degree program. The degree program's really pretty vast, but settled into that fire protection side of it just kind of what interested me the most, and kind of having that kind of fire department background. So graduated in December 2013, and then head back to Illinois to work, and kind of had a couple different roles between now and then. And in January of January of 2019. Yeah, I think January of 2019 ended up moving out to Montana. So my wife's from Montana, and have had the privilege to serve as the fire marshal at Montana State University here in Bozeman since then. So yeah, it's kind of how I got into it, and it's been good to me so far. So
That's awesome. That's really interesting to hear about, the genesis of your career and you starting out with a lot of your family in the fire service, and that's really special. Yeah, that's interesting to hear about. Yeah, I'd like to hear more about, I see that you spent some time, as a firefighter, and yeah, I'd like to hear more about that time in your career, if you wouldn't mind going over just kind of that experience and some of the lessons you learned uh, in that portion of your career.
yeah, so I kind of getting involved with the fire department pretty early made that create really there's kind of a lot of opportunity there, for basically a high school student. And kind of my path was, I kind of was fairly aggressive in pursuing fire training. Um, Kind of my senior year of high school, and that fall, I ended up getting my EMT license, and then I was licensed in the state of Illinois for that. And then I graduated high school a semester early, which was kind of an interesting adventure in itself. But and then that fall, I took a semester at the community college just to get a bunch of transfer credits in. And at the same time, I went through a fire academy, and got certified in Illinois as a firefighter. And it was kind of a cool summer gig. I could work as a firefighter EMT, and pick up shifts here and there. And the town that I was kind of grew up in a smaller town, so it was a combination paid on call fire department. So whenever it's kind of if you were available and the pager went off, hey, there's some work to do, and kind of get to the fire station and kind of help out where you can. So so it was kind of cool. It kind of worked throughout some breaks when I could, when I was home for school. And it really kind of gave me some great experience to kind of responding to fire alarms, responding to fires, responding to all sorts of different events. But really, it kind of was some really valuable experience to, especially once I got to OSU and kind of diving into fire code, diving into sprinkler code, kind of understanding a bit of these systems and understanding the manual firefighting portion of it. Even in throughout the fire academy, we did trench rescue and hazmat, and a bunch of kind of specialized rescue classes, which first semester at OSU, you're taking occupational safety, and that's pretty much how do you work safely in a trench, and how do you work safely around chemicals, and how do you manage those chemical inventories. And so a lot of it was kind of it was a really great introduction to a lot of my coursework kind of right away, but even down the road to kind of navigating some of those courses, and having kind of some the perspective of a responder, understanding, hey, how, fire lines kind of can get overlooked at times, but knowing, hey, that fire lane's pretty important. And, it was just a huge benefit, really.
Yeah, it sounds like that's provided some invaluable context to probably, the rest of your career. I mean, your entire career, being able to have that time in the fire service and just, contextualize all these things that you got to learn later in school. That's really awesome that you had that experience. I'm sure that that made the degree at OSU, which is very hands-on and very technology based, even more impactful, and probably made a lot more of those lectures stick, I'm sure, since it wasn't your first exposure to the subject.
Oh,
But
definitely. And it was a great, it was kind of a great introduction too, just to meet a lot of the friends that I made too, because there's, you kind of enter in, to a new, out of state school, and you don't really know anyone, and kind of to get, the camaraderie of the fire protection program, and kind of meeting people who are firefighters or served as volunteer firemen, volunteer firefighters across the country. Really, it's kind of gives you a common bond right away, which is huge to kind of just adjust to that college life.
definitely, definitely, yeah. And just more on your time at OSU. Yeah, would you? I'd like to hear. Since you had that nice experience as a firefighter and kind of grew up in the fire service, what was some of your favorite parts about your time at Oklahoma State University, and what were some of your favorite classes, and what kind of really hit home for you, I guess.
Yeah, so really, I stayed. I like to stay pretty busy most of the time. And when I was at OSU, I kind of, one of the things, right away, I'm like, hey, I'm a poor college kid. I need to find some part time work. And my first year, I worked for environmental health and safety at OSU, and we would actually work football games and basketball games, kind of those special events, as first responders. And I'm like, and that was awesome in itself, because it was like, hey, cool, you could kind of be around the football games, you could kind of be around the crowds, you're there to ensure the safety of everyone. But it was kind of a cool deal, and again, kind of getting to meet some people. And then I kind of, really started to get, the clubs were huge, getting involved. I pretty much went to most all the core fire protection clubs that are out there. But kind of getting involved in the Fire Protection Society right away, and the Society of Fire Protection Engineers at OSU was a great experience. And and I had the pleasure of serving as the president of our OSU SFPE chapter, which was really just an awesome kind of experience in itself. And class wise, I kind of, there was a lot of them that was just like, wow, hey, that's really cool. And, I can't wait to get to class. And, I can't wait to, it's like, not like, oh, I got a 3 hour lab this week. It's like, no, cool. I got a 3 hour lab at the fire lab, and we're going to run a fire pump. Or, I got a 3 hour hazmat lab, and we're actually going to go out and get kind of donned and doffed into some hazmat gear, and go through a couple of incident exercises. And, um, some of the classes were tough. Like, sprinkler design. Man, that was a tough class. Trying to kind of get through, and kind of understand the hand calcs behind it, and then you're trying to kind of teach yourself and trying to learn, the software programs and AutoCAD for it, and you're trying to do that all within a semester. Um, Realistically, I kind of, my favorite two classes that I probably had. Um, were really probably fire dynamics, and also just hazmat incident command. It was just kind of both of those things were kind of, they built upon the skills of the earlier classes that you were in, but you could really kind of see the fruit of those labor and in your earlier classes. And it's kind of, everything kind of started to stick a little bit more.
For sure, yeah. I definitely, for me, that fire dynamics was probably one of the hardest courses I took at OSU. But when I was taking the PE exam, I'd say there's probably not a class that would have helped more. Like if I had just gone back through that class's notes and everything we learned, because it seemed like there were just a ton of questions over, fire phenomenon and that sort of thing. So it's neat to be a part of a program that has classes that are, really meaningful in a real world context, like FPST. So that's awesome. I'm glad to hear about your time. It sounds like you really enjoyed your time, and yeah, I resonate with that idea. So it's always good to hear from FPST grad and somebody who has gone on to do good things. So it's good to hear about that. I like that. So wanted to get into a little bit more into your professional career and talk about, it seems like from what little I know about you, that there's a through line of in your career of sort of inspections and being an authority, having jurisdiction. So yeah, I just wanted to get into that a little bit more about, how has your experience been, and a little bit more on what does the role of authority having jurisdiction look like, and talk about that a little bit if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, sure, yeah, and and that's kind of I've had a couple different roles since I've graduated, and I've really kind of have considered myself kind of on that AHJ side of it, really ever since I graduated, and my first job out of college was kind of right next to home where I grew up, and it was in a nuclear power plant, where I was the fire protection program manager. So it was kind of you were the AHJ, but it was kind of looked a little bit different. Working in nuclear power, it's pretty highly regulated, and um, and that can create quite a bit of headache. But at the same time, it's like, well, hey, that's awesome. There's a ton of documentation that's out there. There's all these different entities coming in to inspect you, ensuring that what you're doing is safe and not gonna harm the public. It kind of started, it was kind of starting. I'm like, a fresh college graduate, stepping into it and kind of saying, well, here's some authority, and it's like, whoa, that's kind of terrifying. But OSU prepared me pretty well, technically, to handle that. And I kind of I moved from the nuclear plant to a national laboratory, and it was the work wise it was a pretty similar environment, um, but at the lab it was kind of a little it was a little bit different, in which we had you had a kind of a fire protection team, where you had three other engineers that were working with you, and you had a team of fire alarm technicians that were there to support the lab. And you're kind of, to me, it was like you have the nuclear plant, you had one plant, and you had a couple different outbuildings and stuff here, but you're using the codes that the plant was licensed to. So you're using kind of some older codes that are out there, and there's not a whole lot that changes inside of those plants that you have to kind of worry about too much. It's little odds and ends here and there. But at the laboratory there, we had about 100 or so buildings built, and all from post Manhattan Project to buildings going up right away, and had varying degrees of technology and hazards, and so it was a lot of like a building by building assessment kind of a thing, which was interesting, and trying to figure out, well, how do you do this work safely, but at the same time that's going to protect the research and going to protect the client that's working there. And that was some really great experience, and I enjoyed the technical challenges that were there. But I kind of had always had kind of a desire to get back towards a fire department, and and most of the time you'll see those fire department career opportunities don't really come around all too often. So I kind of got I was pretty fortunate that it had an opening pop up in the northwest suburbs of Chicago as a fire inspector, and I ended up kind of moved up there and worked there for a couple of years, and that was kind of that and that was really awesome. It was like, here's a you're working for a fire department. You have a community that you're trying to do code enforcement on, and that was completely new to me. I knew the code. I know how to like navigate the code, but then you kind of learn about how do you physically apply that code, and how do you take the code that's adopted in the jurisdiction and how do you apply that to a building is under construction, but at the same time the building next door has been there for 40 or 50 years, and it's kind of like at the same time it's not just coming in with the code enforcement hammer to swing around, but to as you're walking through whatever the business, how do you find those spots where you can apply your education and your knowledge to educate the clients that you're walking around with, and hey, there's a code requirement to do this, but hey, this is why that code requirement exists, and you know you know pretty much all of that code book that's out there is there's a reason that code was made. So kind of helping to kind of share that as you're going from place to place. And so while I was working up in the suburbs up there, I got married, and my wife was from Helena, Montana. So she was always kind of wanting to get back to Montana, and she attended school here at MSU, and we're sitting there one day, and I kind of saw a job posting pop up for the MSU fire marshal position, and applied, and was fortunate to move out here and to take that role. So it's kind of the college campus is completely different than anywhere else that I worked. It's pretty interesting, but it's really similar to a city. We're kind of our own little city in itself, but a lot of differences here and there.
Wow, that's awesome. It sounds like you've had interesting career and a couple different guest people. You could think of AHJ as one thing, but really all of those parts of your career apply and are interesting in and of themselves. You had a lot of good points. Some stuff I just wanted to circle back on is you're talking about working for the nuclear plant and kind of doing inspections and facility maintenance slash like looking at codes. Yeah, I was just wondered what kind of codes are these facilities, just maintained to? Are these like Department of Energy codes and standards? Are these just your vanilla like building codes, or yeah, what is that? Yeah, what kind of codes are those, if you remember?
Yeah, so it's kind of, it's really interesting. So when you look at nuclear power as a whole across the United States, there's not that many, it's kind of fire protection is a pretty close knit family, but, nuclear power is pretty much a close knit family in itself. Um, I want to, you used to be able to know, I remember what the reactor count was in the United States. I want to say it's probably about 100 or so now. Um, but it's kind of like one of those things to say, oh, hey, I work in nuclear power, and it's like, oh, well, you work in Florida. It's like, oh yeah, well, what plant do you work at? There's only 2 or 3 plants there, but um, so nuclear power as a whole is regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they've it's been interesting because ever since the inception of commercial nuclear power, it's kind of you know, fire codes have changed, but at the same time, nuclear safety has changed. Um, so, kind of the plants that the initial plants that were built and were licensed were, those codes that kind of constructed them have kind of changed time and time again. Um, and as we kind of learn more about nuclear safety events, Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island or most recently Fukushima, kind of change all of that. And it's interesting because it's kind of, that was kind of the walking into a nuclear power plant. It's kind of like, well, this is the first time that someone's telling you, well, I have a code that's, more important than fire protection. And, ultimately what, nuclear safety, that kind of nuclear safety in itself is paramount. So there's really a bunch of, you could look at, any given risk that could go wrong in a nuclear plant and cause a significant event, and fire protection is just one of those. So the plant that I was at was it was a relatively newer plant. And so it's, the really cool thing about it and the regulatory environment is that it's pretty transparent. So anyone could go on like the Nuclear Regulatory's website and kind of search to say, hey, what is the plant's like licensing basis? And that tells you, hey, it was built to, the sprinklers design was NFPA 13, and it was designed, the 92 edition of the standard. And, the fire alarm system was, 1972, NFPA 72, but it was maybe, the 1976 edition or whatever. But then it gets to a level of detail too, where it says, if you have a kind of a design, a deviation from what that design is, it's called out in that licensing basis, and it's approved by the regulator. So there's really a lot of, it's kind of cool to me that you have that level of documentation and that level of detail. Newer plants now are kind of shifting to more of a probabilistic approach to fire protection, and NFPA 805 is a big deal now within the industry, where there's actually fire modeling and and it's kind of a more informed basis of fire protection for the plants. So it's kind of the licensing basis overall gets pretty deep. I had some pretty thick binders on my desk that kind of documented that, and but it was, as a kind of being the fire protection geek that I am, it's kind of cool to be able to look and say, hey, I have an antiquated halon system, but I can go through and I know I have every single manual that I need and every drawing, and any change to the system is documented. So definitely a lot to appreciate there.
Man, that sounds awesome. I'm really impressed about like hearing the level of documentation and detailing. I mean, it sounds intuitive when you're talking about nuclear facilities that they would need this sort of attention to detail and documentation. But I always tell people as an engineer, my essentially my whole job is making sure that construction and fire protection systems and life safety is documented. And just like specifying these fire protection systems and just making sure that the owner has proper documentation and the ability to maintain these systems is at the core of what a fire protection engineer does for construction. So that's really impressive to hear about how you had all those manuals for the antiquated halon systems or whatever it was that was in the facility. And yeah, I wish it was easier to look up that sort of information for just your everyday building. That would be awesome. I wish that sort of documentation was industry standard. Also, another point you touched on was, I really liked when you're talking about your inspection job was, how do the process of applying the code and also, but not beating people down with the code or kind of, not being just heavy-handed with code enforcement. And it seems to me that striking a balance between, encouraging business and, but also being a code enforcer is something that's wouldn't be easy. So, yeah, that sounds like an interesting scenario. Yeah, how did you kind of strike a balance between educating people about codes and standards and their proper application, but not kind of cross over the line into just being somebody that is unreasonable or just wants everything to the exact black and white letter of the code.
Yeah, and I'm like, and that's tough, and it's really it's really kind of the constant struggle, that you're trying to find. Maybe constant balance is probably really more of a better way to describe it. But um, the code's the code, and it's there for a reason. It should be and is legally adopted, depending on where your jurisdiction is, and how that's actually done might be a little, may vary from place to place. But um, kind of my biggest couple things on that is just kind of communication and consistency. And and that's kind of, if I go into um, any given restaurant, no matter what that restaurant is, I need to look for those, look and document those same violations across the board if I see them. But the other thing too is just to kind of communicate and to go through and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. A lot of times it's kind of a part-time sales role where you're trying to explain the benefits and the features of, well, here's what, if you comply with the code, here's kind of what it will get you. Other times it's just kind of, hey, that exit sign's burnt out. We need a new light bulb, or, you need to replace the battery in it. Some of them are kind of, it's everyone's kind of unique in where they're at, and it's kind of everyone's kind of on their own journey, I guess, if you will, to say, here's what you can kind of understand about your building, and here's, it's, they're the expert in the operations of their building and the operations of whatever business they're in. So kind of taking the time to kind of listen to them and get to know people too as you walk around. Can you when you and kind of being flexible to a degree where it's like, hey, you're this all these boxes are blocking your exit. Do you have time? Do you have someone that can move them? And just kind of you're calling it out and you're noting it along the way, but giving them the chance to kind of resolve things right away is huge, and a lot of people will kind of do that right away. It's kind of you even at at home or at work for me, and when I walk into work, you kind of do the same patterns every day. So it's like part of it's kind of the fire code as a whole is kind of a unique way of thinking, and you're kind of constantly trying to learn it and trying to understand it, to ensure the safety of everyone that's in that building, whether they're working or visiting. And then kind of if you do kind of find those violations, and not everyone's going to be super thrilled all the time, but when you give them a violation notice, but it's kind of one of those things where you communicate, and you communicate as much as you can to assist the situation. You're consistent in your approach, and if you're in a community that has a strong code enforcement program, they have a process, and you kind of just you're sticking to the process every time. It's hey, you have 30 days here, you have 30 days there's no you don't make kind of keeping it consistent for everyone, and then really trying to be firm firm with everyone, but be fair as well. It's kind of there's some things that you can kind of call out when you're walking through a building, and you can kind of get a where they'll fix it right then and there, um, and just kind of help them to understand, and kind of know what's right and wrong in terms of what the code is. Um, it's challenging, but there's really a bunch of resources that are out there to better understand the code and the intent of the code, and um, and kind of networking with your peers and whatever the code enforcement agency is huge too, just to understand how people kind of learn about things and how they share those messages with others.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about just coordination between other jurisdictions and other communities as far as enforcement goes. It's interesting to hear. It's very commonplace in the fire service, but I imagine it's commonplace for authorities having jurisdictions to share resources. And kind of help each other out in regards to how they are dealing with certain changes in the built environment and just kind of sharing resources with each other and keeping everybody up to date since there's a real camaraderie there. And I've seen that. I was just listening to it was the NFPA's podcast, and they were talking about the unique challenges that the cannabis industry is bringing to certain jurisdictions, and how Colorado's been trying to share some of their information with other jurisdictions about how they've been enforcing and kind of policing these extraction processes and the hazards that they present. So I think that's a really interesting note about um, coordination between jurisdictions, and just I think that's valuable.
Yeah, definitely. And from and that's kind of one of the things, and within, back on the, fire department days, that, you have a big house fire, you're calling for mutual aid, and you're trying to get, you're getting all the help that you can to safely manage and mitigate that incident. And really that's kind of something that you can kind of, is kind of a natural correlation between, the operations side of the fire department and the code enforcement side, to say, hey, whoever the town next door is, hey, I'm having, having these problems, or, hey, I'm seeing all these issues kind of catching up, but what are you seeing? And, how can we kind of work together to help fix that? And, a lot of the time, there's some great professional organizations that are out there, um, like NFPA and ICC and SFP and all those other ones that are great to help. And, but it's even just kind of saying, hey, let's go talk to the fire department next door, and, kind of get, kind of make the code more locally, to try to understand it and see what's really going on in the region. But
Definitely, definitely, that's all good stuff. Yeah, I wanted to circle back to you talking about your current role, and yeah, I wanted to hear a little bit more about, but hear a little bit more about how it's different, how the role is different. You were saying it's a lot different than any other authority having jurisdiction role that you've had before. So yeah, I don't know. I thought that was interesting, and it makes sense. And really, my only experience with an AHJ or a fire marshal for a university is when I'd be studying at the OSU library, and they'd tell you to like get your book bag out of the egress pathway so that you wouldn't be blocking it, or you didn't want to be have your study set up for finals in the way of the path of egress. So yeah, I'd like to hear more about that.
yeah, and it's really kind of, the AHJ at a university really has a kind of a unique, it's a unique kind of position. And there's an awesome article about that in the NFPA Journal magazine that was, that's published by NFPA. But in that article is called School Spirit. It was written by Justin Daniels, and um, he is the university fire marshal for the University of Oklahoma. And he's also the president of the Center for Campus Fire Safety, which is one of the professional networking organizations that I'm involved with. And um, he wrote an article to say, how different it is between a municipal, fire marshal type, your traditional fire marshal role, and what it's like to be, within the university. And, even kind of to that extent too, there's a lot of differences between universities too, between, your private schools and public schools, and, maybe a community college. And Montana State's a land grant university, so very similar to Oklahoma State, but we're state employees, and um, you know it, the university's been around for 130 years, and they're kind of, the mission is to, really to go out throughout Montana and educate everybody that you can. And that kind of comes through to really everything that we do here. And it's one of the things that I really kind of keep a keen focus on as I'm working just in my day-to-day role. But and it kind of, one of the things that I always talk about too with folks that work around me here is that the AHJ is not really one person. Like if you go through and look at any kind of your NFPA standards, that your AHJ could be a variety of people. And I am kind of one of the AHJs for MSU, but we're within the city of Bozeman, so the city is also an AHJ, but at the same time the state's also an AHJ, and our insurer is an AHJ. But typically it's kind of, we are kind of our own little town. We kind of have, when you're on campus, we have our own water system, but it's kind of, to a degree, we operate our buildings a lot longer than most, what you would typically see in a municipality. We have buildings on campus that are over 100 years old, and they're still they're still functional, and they're still, people are working in those spaces every day. And how do you kind of, I don't even know if there was a fire code in the state 100 years ago, but how do you ensure that you kind of are managing the safety of the facility year after year? And then you kind of, so you have kind of that as a challenge. We have a lot of special events on campus, and there's a team here that's pretty much their prime job here is to provide that college experience where you're getting concerts at our football stadium, concerts at our field house, and you're getting big names like Luke Combs and Kenny Chesney and Elton John played here. And it's like, how do you, here we have all of these facilities, and how do you kind of work the special event side of it to make sure that we have a safe facility, and have a facility that's going to ensure a safe event. And and kind of the other end of that too is that you're kind of, it's part AHJ and enforcing the fire code, but also kind of, there's a degree of consulting that I do too, just to help our facility services organization here kind of understand, the facility management side of things here, where it's, hey, we have, there's buildings where, hey, this building, the fire alarm system in this building is 60 years old. We really need to probably make sure we're budgeting for that, so that we can make sure that our life expectancy of a fire alarm system is 20 years. So there's a lot that goes on. And the other part is that there is a student body here, and there's a research institution here too, that Montana State's huge with research. And last year the research funds coming into the university were like $130 million. So it was like, an incredible, year after year increases in the research that's being generated here. But at the same time, you got to kind of look at it to say, well, here's you have this cutting edge research project, and if they were working with, lithium ion batteries or whatever, pyrophorics, how do you apply the fire code to that and ensure that that protects both the researcher that's working on it, and the university's property and the university's risk, um, from just a kind of an institutional standpoint. So there's kind of a lot that goes on, um, and depending on kind of the a lot of universities operate on kind of a similar framework, but there some universities operate a little bit differently too, with how they kind of set up their fire and life safety programs.
That's awesome. That's really interesting. I like hearing about, the intricacies of, well, being a fire marshal, or, being a part of the entity that is, the fire marshal for a state run college. That's very interesting, extremely interesting. You touched on a lot of topics that I think we could go. We could probably spend a lot of time on, but yeah, a couple of the ones I thought were interesting is, the people use authority having jurisdiction, or AHJ, but yeah, you said, a variety of people can be considered the authority having jurisdiction. The insuring agent, or the state, or the city, and so I thought that was a interesting point there. Yeah, a lot of times people just think of like one person, or and like that's it, but really there's a lot of different stakeholders for a community, like a college campus, and a lot of people who can be considered as the AHJ. So I thought that was a great point. And then yeah, I mean, about another thing you talked about that I thought was kind of mind blowing is, yeah, talking about a building that's 100 years old, and you know, I've been doing some research on, the building codes and how long, like your regional building codes have been around, and it's like things start getting real muddy after about 20 or 30 years. It's like ICC has only been around for, not that really, that not even a generation. So it's it's kind of wild to think about, what kind of local regional code that a building was developed in accordance to in 100 years ago. So that's a really interesting point. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, it's and it's kind of interesting, and that's kind of where I go back to my nuclear days, and I miss the documentation side of it because you have a building that is from the 50s, and even that building from the 50s is not, the way it was designed has been added on to, it's been modified, there's been tenant improvements, and kind of like things to that nature. But and then it's like, well, how do you really understand what part of the building, what the code of record is on that? And we have a brand new dorm building opening up this fall, and I'm like, hey, that's something I'm taking right now and documenting it just to say, hey, yes, this was built under the 2012 IFC. It's the 2010 edition of NFPA 13 and 72, and hopefully kind of just kind of storing that away. So eventually down the road, that information is going to be needed, and you could really kind of understand those things as code changes, and because code change overall kind of never really slows down.
Yeah, and on the note of documentation, just like verifying that you have as builds that are, worth the paper that they're printed on, is such a hard thing to deal with existing construction. And so many times there's not as builds that are worth much. Maybe they were only good for like the design phase, and then by the time the shop drawings come out, everything's totally different. So that's a constant struggle too, for as
Oh,
far as documentation goes.
definitely. And just prime example of that is that we have several buildings on with all the buildings that we have. I mean, we have a pretty good number of buildings that were impacted by the central sprinkler, the O-ring recalls, that happened. And I want to say if from the documentation that I found, it was 600 or 800 heads that were replaced. But it's kind of like, well, we replaced the heads, but then it's like if you look at the original documentation, you kind of still have a gap there to if we can find the sprinkler drawings for that building, but at the same time they still show a recalled head. And that's something that really needs to live with that sprinkler documentation of the building, just so that part of history is there.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's interesting dealing with those kind of challenges. It's infinitely fascinating to me. But well, I wanted to get into some professional development topics since it sounds like you really have a passion for fire protection and you are plugged in on some different resources and just like to stay in touch with the pulse of fire safety and of a wide variety of topics. So yeah, I just wanted to get started with you know, as somebody who is aware, or keeping in touch with, you know, um, trends in the industry and whatnot, what do you see as, I know we talked about a little bit before the show got started, kind of the digital impact of COVID. But yeah, I just wanted to pick your brain on what you see as a trend in the industry or, kind of what do you see on the horizon for fire protection and life safety?
Yeah, so I think kind of as we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but I'm like, it's really kind of an interesting time to be doing fire protection in a COVID world. And one of the I think the trends that's going to really benefit the industry is just the connectedness of COVID. It's kind of a unique connectedness where you could jump on a video chat with someone, and there's probably more people using instant messaging, Microsoft Teams type apps, and it's kind of an acceleration into the digital world, I think. And that's kind of exciting for me. I kind of like that aspect of it. I like to be able to kind of find information and find it quick. I keep all of my files are stored in the cloud. I kind of am completely on board that bandwagon. But kind of I think one of the huge trends that that you're a part of too is just what in the podcast world is, kind of seeing what you're doing here with the podcast, and the Fire Sprinkler podcast and the Inspect Point podcast. There's a lot of awesome podcasts just specifically coming out for fire protection. And ICC Pulse has a great podcast, and NFPA has a podcast out. And it's kind of I like podcasts because it's a quick, easy commute kind of a deal that you can kind of listen to something, and you can really learn along the way. And it's kind of I see from my perspective, I see a lot of kind of like an entrepreneurial kind of a spirit between coming out of a lot of these the fire protection podcasts that are out there, the fire protection blogs that are kind of popping up. And what is the real awesome part to me is that it's kind of spreading the word, in terms of here's the fire code, here's true fire protection, and here's how you can kind of help to understand that. And you're not I still get all the NFPA magazines and stuff, but you're not just waiting on the NFPA magazine to come once a month. That you can kind of log in and see, here's an awesome post from Meyer Fire, or the building code blog, and take a lot of that, and it's like super practical information, and it helps you understand really some of the pretty complex sections of it. So I think kind of overall it's kind of increasing that accessibility of what fire protection is. And I'm a huge fan of Oklahoma State, and but I also know that the OSU grads that are out there, the Maryland grads, the WPI grads, there's really only so many that are kind of a fire protection grad out there, and there's a ton of retirements happening, and finding ways that you can, how do you kind of get some of that legacy knowledge and keep on, keep passing it on and keep transferring it, and really to make the nation and even the world just a safer place from fire.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, what you said about accessibility and just, providing, lowering the bar to entry for these complex topics. I can say from, my relatively short career that I've seen just an explosion of online availability for fire safety and fire protection system knowledge. And yeah, I love the fact that of course NFPA and SFP have you know beautifully written, gorgeous content, but they only are coming out with this kind of information, whether it's a month or maybe even less, and sometimes it's, not exactly what you wanted to learn about, or, it's just not their fault. But, I'm so happy to see other people, posting things and kind of uh, cultivating this environment of people wanting to share the sticky parts or the difficult parts of fire protection and just kind of make it easier for people to be experts on this stuff, because I think it's so important. But no, I was just gonna say that yeah, there's a lot of I love listening to podcasts too, and I've listened to all those ones you mentioned. I think I've at least listened to clips of Inspect Point and the Fire Sprinkler podcast, and I've listened to the one I just listened to I really liked was Viking just put out they have a little like a video series for their deluge valves, and I thought that was really interesting because like a frequently asked question for their deluge valves, and so I thought that was good. We do a lot of high expansion foam work at the company I work for. So just to understand the different actuation mechanisms and some of the frequently asked questions, I'm like, I love that there's a video out there where people are talking about this sort of thing, because people need to know, these are not easy systems. A deluge system with the electric activation and, flow control trim, fed by a foam pump is not a simple system. So, any sort of information on these topics, I'm just like, yes, this is great. I'm all about it. But yeah, so I totally resonate, obviously, with that, with your kind of statement on about the trends and the kind of deluge of information that's been kind of COVID has definitely helped kick along. But yeah, so I think I want to end it with yeah, what if you were getting into fire protection or becoming authority having jurisdiction again? What piece of advice would you give yourself, or would you give a professional getting into the field?
Yeah, no, I mean that's definitely a great question, and um, and it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of AHJs out there that they've kind of, if you talk to some of the fire department guys, it's kind of everyone has kind of a unique journey on how they got to where they're at and how they became the AHJ, and um, especially kind of being a younger AHJ. Kind of, the first thing I would, definitely do is, recommend finding what kind of network um, you can kind of plug into, whether it's, a bigger, national type network. If it's something that, if your local area has some sort of fire prevention organization or association. That would be a huge help. But even just to say, kind of figuring out, well, how are you gonna, how do you sort your files and how do you kind of build your library and understand, kind of, retain a lot of what's in the code and, um, just kind of, there's a lot that you could find just from scouring Google and seeing what's out there. But, um, really it's kind of plugging into the knowledge that's around you, whether it's in person. There's Facebook groups, a lot of different kind of AHJ based Facebook groups, or even NFPA 25 inspector type groups, or NICET type groups on Facebook, which are, I'm not a fire alarm tech by any means. I kind of pretty much touch reset and silent, and that's about it. But there's a ton of information that you can kind of glean from those groups and that, and what's out there. But and then really kind of building those relationships, but at the same time kind of keeping your eyes out and keeping your eyes open to see see who you can kind of help out along the way. There's a lot of folks that are out there that typically I don't know if you'll really meet any AHJ that's going to say they got more, plenty of help in the office and can manage their workload. I think pretty much every AHJ that's out there is kind of overworked and underpaid and dealing with staffing issues. But and that's kind of part of that challenge. But kind of plugging in there and seeing what you can do to kind of expand your network and sharing what you learn along the way.
That's great. I think that being connected and, finding people who can tell you how to build you know, a better mousetrap, or in our situation, a better documentation system, is something that's invaluable. And, so I think that's a great piece of advice. Well, Jake, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on, and I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can do it again.
Definitely. Yeah, no. Thanks for having me on, and yeah, I look forward to future episodes and learning more.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.